What it really meant to be rich 10,000 years ago. Imagine waking up one morning with more wealth than almost everyone alive. Not because you owned a mansion, not because you had gold, not because your bank account had more zeros than anyone else's, because you owned 12 goats. Today, that sounds ridiculous. A dozen goats might be worth a few $1,000s at most. Hardly the kind of fortune that changes history. But 10,000 years ago, 12 goats could transform your entire life. They could feed your children when winter came. They could attract a husband or wife. They could settle disputes without bloodshed. They could earn allies, command respect, and determine whether your family survived another generation. Long before coins were minted, long before paper money, long before billionaires, stock markets, and digital currencies, human beings had already invented wealth. It simply looked nothing like ours. If you stepped into one of those ancient villages, you probably wouldn't recognize who was rich. The man wearing the nicest clothes? Perhaps not. The family living in the largest shelter? Maybe. The real fortune might be quietly grazing just outside the village fence. Because for most of human history, wealth wasn't something you could hide inside a vault. It breathed. It reproduced. It wandered across open fields beneath the morning sun. And owning more of it changed everything. But humans were not always obsessed with possessions. For hundreds of thousands of years, almost nothing truly belonged to anyone. Our ancestors wandered endlessly across forests, rivers, grasslands, and deserts. Everything they carried had to fit on their backs. A heavy object wasn't a treasure, it was a burden. Imagine walking 20 kilometers under a blazing sun. Every extra kilogram becomes an enemy. You don't collect furniture. You don't build massive houses. You don't store 10 years of food. You simply can't. Life keeps moving. These small groups rarely stayed in one place for very long. When animals migrated, they followed. When rivers dried, they packed everything they owned and searched for water elsewhere. Their wealth wasn't measured by objects. It was measured by relationships. A skilled hunter who shared meat earned trust. An experienced healer became invaluable. Someone who knew where water could be found during drought might save dozens of lives. Knowledge was wealth. Generosity was wealth. Your reputation could be worth more than any possession. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have found something surprising. People who hoard resources often lose respect instead of gaining it. Food spoils, meat rots quickly. Trying to keep everything for yourself makes little sense. Sharing creates allies, and allies become your insurance policy. If tomorrow's hunt fails, someone you helped yesterday might feed your children. In that world, the richest person wasn't necessarily the one with the most. It was often the one who gave the most away. This idea feels almost backwards today. Modern wealth grows by accumulation. Ancient wealth often grew through generosity. But around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. The Ice Age slowly loosened its grip. Temperatures rose. Rainfall patterns changed. Wild grasses spread across huge regions. Animals gathered where food became abundant. For the first time, many human groups discovered they didn't always have to keep moving. Some stayed, not for days, not for weeks, for years. At first, nothing dramatic changed. People still hunted, still gathered fruits, still fished. But staying in one place allowed a completely different way of thinking. Instead of asking, "What can we find today?" people began asking, "What can we grow tomorrow?" It seems like a tiny difference. In reality, it reshaped civilization. Someone noticed seeds dropped near camp returned as plants months later. Others realized certain animals were easier to tame than others. The wild slowly became manageable. Fields replaced forests. Pens replaced open plains. And for the first time in human history, food could become a surplus. Imagine harvesting far more grain than your family could eat. Now you face an entirely new problem. Where do you keep it? Storage changed everything. Clay jars, stone granaries, underground pits. For the first time, food could survive seasons instead of days. Suddenly, tomorrow mattered almost as much as today. And wherever food could be stored, wealth could be stored too. That changed human behavior forever. No longer did every family begin each season almost equal. Some harvests were larger, some families worked more land, some simply got lucky with weather. Over years, small differences became enormous ones. One household stored enough grain for winter, another stored enough for 5 winters. The gap widened, generation after generation. Then came livestock. Few inventions in human history created wealth faster than domesticated animals. A goat didn't simply provide milk, it produced kids. A sheep produced wool every year. Cattle pulled heavy loads. Oxen plowed fields. Animals became machines that made more machines. The richest families didn't just own food. Their wealth literally multiplied while they slept. Every spring brought newborn animals. Every breeding season expanded fortunes without lifting another stone. Imagine owning 2 goats. Years later, you own 10, then 30, then 80. Your children inherit them. Their children inherit even more. The first family fortunes had arrived. Long before banks paid interest, nature itself was paying dividends. And everyone noticed. A man's herd became visible proof of his success. No one needed to ask how wealthy he was. They could simply count. Across ancient Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of Europe, livestock became the closest thing humanity had to money. Need help building a house? Offer sheep. Want to settle a disagreement? Offer cattle. Seeking a marriage? Bring animals. In many cultures, livestock became the language of value itself. Some traditions survive even today. In parts of East Africa, cattle remain one of the highest symbols of wealth and status. A large herd speaks louder than expensive clothing. Because unlike luxury items, animals feed families. They create more animals. They represent security. Ancient people understood something modern investors still appreciate. Assets that reproduce are extraordinarily valuable. Yet wealth created another problem humanity had rarely faced before: envy. When nearly everyone owns little, differences remain small. When one family owns 20 cows, while another owns none, resentment grows. Soon, villages required rules. Who owns which field? Who inherits the herd? Who decides where animals graze? Questions that barely existed among wandering hunter-gatherers suddenly became matters of survival. Property emerged, boundaries appeared, fences followed, and with them, conflict. Many of humanity's earliest wars weren't fought over ideology. They were fought over resources: fields, water, animals, the things that now represented wealth. A successful raid could double a tribe's livestock overnight. A failed defense could erase generations of prosperity. Riches became worth killing for, but wealth also created something unexpected: specialization. If one farmer consistently produced surplus grain, someone else no longer needed to farm. They could become a potter, a blacksmith, a builder, a trader, an artist. Civilization itself was slowly being purchased by agricultural abundance. The first cities didn't rise because humans suddenly became smarter. They rose because enough food existed to free people from producing food every day. Every great civilization rested on this simple foundation. Someone had to grow enough to feed everyone else. As villages expanded into towns, and towns into cities, wealth became harder to measure. Land mattered. Animals mattered. Stored grain mattered. Eventually, precious metals entered the story. Gold looked beautiful. It never rusted. It was scarce. But here's the surprising part. For thousands of years, gold wasn't nearly as useful as a healthy herd of cattle. You cannot drink gold. You cannot milk it. It cannot pull a plow. During famine, a sack of grain often became more valuable than jewelry. Ancient fortunes were practical first, beautiful second. Even kings understood this. Royal records from early civilizations often counted livestock alongside precious metals. Both represented power, but only one could reproduce itself. Perhaps that's why so many ancient myths celebrate abundant flocks rather than overflowing treasure chests. To ancient minds, a growing herd represented life itself. Looking back, it's tempting to think these people lived simpler lives. In some ways, they did. But the emotional forces driving wealth haven't changed much at all. They worried about providing for children. They compared themselves with neighbors. They dreamed of leaving something behind after death. They feared losing everything to drought, disease, or war. The objects changed. The psychology didn't. Today, fortunes exist as numbers glowing on computer screens. Yesterday, they walked across dusty hillsides beneath the open sky. Yet both answer the same ancient question: how do we make tomorrow safer than today? That question has followed humanity from the first village, to the first kingdom, to the first bank, to the modern world, the billionaire buying another company, and the shepherd proudly counting newborn lambs, are separated by thousands of years, but both are chasing the same feeling. Security, status, the hope that what they build today will outlive them tomorrow. Maybe that is what wealth has always meant. Not luxury, not excess, not even power, but possibility. The possibility that your children might eat when you cannot hunt, that your family survives another winter, that your name continues after you're gone. 10,000 years ago, wealth wasn't measured in dollars. It bleated, it grazed, it filled barns with grain. It stood patiently beside rivers waiting to drink. And if you had 12 goats, you weren't just lucky. You were among the fortunate few who could look toward the future with something priceless: hope.